Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into some deep theological waters, looking at how the cure fits the disease, so to speak.
Yeah, it's this fascinating idea of theological symmetry, that God's plan for salvation isn't just, a generic fix.
Right, not a Band-Aid.
Exactly. It's presented as this incredibly precise, necessary antidote, tailored really to the specific damage caused by the fall.
I love that concept, symmetry. It's just like an underlying divine logic, an architecture to redemption.
That's a great way to put it in architecture.
So our mission today is to explore this Munus Triplex. It's the threefold office of Christ: prophet, priest, and king. And understand why it's seen as, well, the bedrock of how salvation works.
Yeah.
Soteriology, right.
Right. And the core argument, the thing we're really unpacking, is that these three offices line up perfectly with what went wrong. They're the exact cure for the threefold misery of the fall.
Threefold misery. Okay, unpack that a bit.
Ignorance, guilt, and bondage. The idea is humanity was broken in these three specific ways. So the solution, the mediator, had to address all three perfectly.
Okay, that makes sense. A specific problem needs a specific solution. So, the plan for today. How are we going to tackle this?
Well, first we've got to understand the original job, right? What was Adam supposed to be doing before everything went sideways? Because the fall wasn't just a mistake. It was a vocational failure, a complete one.
Right. Got to know the job description before you can understand the failure.
Then we'll break down those three miseries: ignorance, guilt, bondage, really get into what each one means.
And finally,
we connect the dots, show how Christ, as prophet, priest, and king, steps in and provides the perfect, specific remedy for each of those problems, the symmetry.
Excellent. Sounds like a solid plan. Let's dive in. Okay, so the fall, Genesis 3. It's easy to just picture, someone eating fruit they shouldn't have. But you're saying it's much bigger than that? It's about Adam failing at his fundamental job.
Absolutely. We have to rewind to before the fall. What was humanity created for? And the core idea is the imago Dei, the image of God.
Created in God's image.
Right. And that wasn't just about like having consciousness or something. It meant being God's representative on earth. His viceroy, you could almost say.
A viceroy. So like ruling on God's behalf.
Ruling, yes, but also worshiping, mediating truth. It was this comprehensive, integrated role, not just passive innocence, but active commission.
And you're saying the structure of prophet, priest, and king was already there kind of implicitly in Adam's original role.
Exactly. Before those offices were formally instituted later in Israel, Adam was already functioning in those ways.
Let's start with the king part. That one's maybe the clearest.
Adam as proto-king. Okay.
Yeah, look at Genesis 1.28. God tells humanity, subdue it and have dominion over creation. That's royal language. It's about governance.
Subdue and have dominion. So actively ruling, managing creation.
Right. And think about the context back then, the ancient Near East. Understanding that really helps. How so? What's the connection?
Well, in that world, when a big king conquered a region, he wouldn't necessarily live there himself. He'd often set up a statue, an image, an emblem of himself, or appoint a lesser king.
To represent his rule.
Precisely. Adam, made in God's image, was basically God's sovereign emblem placed in creation. He was the lesser king, tasked with administering God's righteous rule, bringing order, stewarding the place.
Wow. Okay, so the Imago Dei itself has this royal function built in. He's governing for God.
Exactly. And you see echoes of this in places like Psalm 8, right?
Right.
Man being crowned with glory and honor, given dominion. It's a majestic language for a reason, a role of stewardship and authority.
Okay, king makes sense. What about priest? Adam as proto-priest. That feels a bit less obvious.
It is less explicit, yeah, but the clues are there, especially in the language used about the Garden of Eden itself.
The garden? How?
The garden isn't just described as, a nice piece of real estate. It functions like a sanctuary, a proto-temple, the place where God's special presence dwelled.
Like holy ground.
Pretty much. And Genesis 2.15 says Adam was placed there to work it and keep it. Now, those two Hebrew verbs, abad and shamar, they're really important.
Okay, tell me about them. Abad and shamar.
Well, abad can mean to work, like farming, sure. But it's very often used in a religious sense to serve God, like in worship. And shamar, to keep, often means to guard or protect. And here's the kicker. These are the exact same verbs used later on to describe the duties of the Levitical priests in the tabernacle.
No way. Really?
Yeah. Their job was to serve, abad, in the holy place, and to guard shamaret from anything unclean or unauthorized.
So Adam's job in the garden wasn't just gardening. It was priestly service, guarding the sanctuary.
That's the argument. He was responsible for maintaining the sanctity of that sacred space, protecting it from corruption, like a temple guardian almost.
Wow. Okay, that adds a whole new layer.
Huh.
King and priest without prophet. Adam as proto-prophet.
Well, what's a prophet, fundamentally? Someone who receives God's word and communicates it, right? A mediator of divine truth. Adam was the very first human to receive a direct command, a direct revelation from God. The instruction about the tree.
The "don't eat this or you'll die" command.
Exactly. That was the foundational piece of divine truth given to humanity at that point. His first prophetic duty was to hear it, believe it, trust it as reality.
And maybe communicate it to Eve.
And uphold it, yeah. Live by it. Make it the basis of their relationship with God. Plus, think about him naming the animals.
Genesis 2, yeah. What's prophetic about that?
Naming, in that ancient context, was an act of authority, but also of understanding and defining reality according to its proper order. It's sort of exercising delegated divine authority through language, aligning creation with God's design. It reflects an understanding given by God.
Huh. Okay. King, priest, prophet, all wrapped up in Adam's original role.
And crucially, they weren't separate jobs. They were totally integrated. His kingly rule should have been guided by the prophetic word he received, and both aimed at the priestly goal of maintaining holiness in God's presence.
So when the failure came...
It wasn't just failing at one thing. He failed across the board. All three functions collapsed together.
Okay, so Genesis 3, the fall. Not just eating fruit, but a total vocational meltdown. A failure in all three roles. Let's break that down. How did he fail as a prophet?
Well, the whole temptation starts with an attack on the prophetic word. The serpent comes in and basically offers a counter-revelation.
Did God really say?
Exactly. Questioning the divine word, and then the flat-out lie. You will not surely die. It's a direct contradiction of the prophetic truth Adam was given.
So the serpent acts like a false prophet.
Precisely. And Adam and Eve, who were supposed to be the faithful guardians of God's truth, what did they do?
They listened. They believed the lie.
They abandoned their post as hearers and keepers of the true word. They chose the creature's word over the Creator's. That's a fundamental prophetic failure, a failure of faith, of trust in God's revelation.
Wow. Okay, that's the prophetic failure. What about the priestly failure? You said his job was to shamar, to guard the garden temple?
Yeah. And what was this serpent? An unclean influence, a source of corruption, trying to enter and defile the sacred space. What should the guardian have done?
Cast him out. Confront him.
Something. But what does Adam do? The text implies he was right there with Eve. He's passive. He lets the intruder speak, lets the defiling counsel happen. He doesn't guard the sanctuary.
He fails the shamar duty.
Completely. And then he participates in the defilement by eating. So inaction followed by complicity. A total failure to protect the holy space entrusted to him.
It's like the security guard letting the vandal in and then joining him.
Pretty much. A catastrophic priestly failure.
And finally, the kingly failure. This seems like maybe the most direct abdication.
Yeah, I remember Genesis 1, dominion over every creeping thing. That technically included the serpent.
He had authority over it.
He did. He was the appointed king of that domain. Instead of exercising his God-given rule over the creature, what happens?
He listens to it, takes instruction from it, obeys it, essentially.
He submits to the subordinate. It's a complete inversion of the created order. The king takes orders from a creeping thing, and in doing so, rebels against the high king who appointed him.
It's treason.
It's absolutely an act of treason. Abdicating his authority, switching allegiance. He failed to rule righteously, and because the king fell, the whole kingdom under his care fell into disorder.
So, rejection of truth, prophetic failure. Defilement of the sacred priestly failure. Submission to the enemy kingly failure. It really is a total breakdown.
Total and comprehensive. And that's why the solution, the cure, had to be just as comprehensive.
Okay, so that failure wasn't just a moment in time. It had lasting consequences, right? This threefold misery you mentioned. We need to understand the damage report if we're going to appreciate the repair job.
Exactly. The fall wasn't just, oops, we sinned. It fundamentally broke something in humanity, in our relationship with God, and even in creation itself. And we can categorize that brokenness into three main areas.
Let's start with the first one, ignorance. You called it the noetic effects. Sounds academic. What does it mean for us?
Right. Noetic comes from the Greek word nous, which means mind or intellect. So this misery strikes at our ability to know and understand truth, especially truth about God.
Wasn't the serpent's promise, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil? Sounds like the opposite of ignorance.
That was the lie. The irony is they grasped for godlike knowledge, But the result was what theologians call a darkened intellect. The mind itself became corrupted, prone to error, futility, self-deception.
So it's not just that we don't know things, it's that our very thinking process is damaged.
Yes, particularly when it comes to spiritual reality. It's not just a lack of information. The fallen mind actually distorts truth. Paul talks about this a lot, especially in Romans 1. He says fallen humanity actively suppresses the truth in unrighteousness.
Suppresses it. So it's not just passive ignorance, it's like an active pushing away of truth.
Exactly. It's willful. And the result, Paul says, is futile thinking. Foolish hearts becoming darkened. Romans 8:7 even says the sinful mind, that knows again, is characterized by enmity against God. It's actually hostile to him.
Hostile to God. Wow. So our minds, left to themselves, are incapable of knowing God properly or even wanting to.
That's the diagnosis. Without divine intervention, the mind is fundamentally compromised at its root when it comes to God. It can't fix itself.
Okay, so if our minds are darkened, hostile, actively suppressing truth, then we desperately need light from the outside. We need someone to break through that ignorance.
Precisely. This state of profound spiritual blindness demands a divine prophet, someone who can bring authoritative, saving truth to us because we can't generate it ourselves.
All right, so the mind is broken. What's the second misery? Guilt.
Yeah, guilt.
Yeah.
This moves from the intellectual realm to the legal and relational realm. Our standing before God changed instantly.
How so?
We went from being in a state of innocent obedience and right relationship to being guilty of disobedience, high treason, remember?
Yeah.
That carries a penalty. It's a change in our legal status before a holy judge.
And the penalty God warned about was death. Did that happen immediately?
Yes, but primarily spiritual death at first. That immediate sense of separation from God, the source of life, that's why Adam and Eve suddenly felt shame, fear, why they hid.
Ah, the hiding in Genesis 3. That's the immediate experience of guilt and alienation.
Exactly. It's the relational breakdown caused by the legal transgression. And that spiritual death, that separation, inevitably leads towards physical death, too. To dust you shall return. That's part of the sentence. Mortality itself becomes part of the curse.
So guilt leads to separation relationally and ultimately physically.
And spatially, too. Think about the expulsion from the garden.
Right. They get kicked out.
That's not just changing location. It's a formal judicial act of exile. They're banished from God's special presence, symbolizing their condemnation and alienation. We're guilty, condemned, exiled, and utterly unable to bridge that gap ourselves.
We can't pay the debt, basically.
We can't. The breach is too severe. So this misery of guilt, this legal problem, demands a legal solution. It demands someone who can satisfy the claims of justice.
Which points towards
a divine priest. Someone who can act as a mediator, offer a sufficient sacrifice and atonement to pay the debt, satisfy justice, and reconcile us to God. Nothing less will do.
Okay, misery 1, ignorance in the mind. Misery 2, guilt before God. What's the third one? Bondage.
Yes, bondage. This deals with the corruption of our actual nature, our being, what theologians call ontological effects, and the resulting mess in the world around us. It's often summed up by the doctrine of total depravity.
Total depravity? That sounds bad. And maybe easily misunderstood. Does it mean everyone is as evil as possible?
No, not usually how it's meant. It doesn't mean everyone is committing every possible sin all the time. It means that sin has affected every part of us. Mind, will, emotions, desires, even our physical bodies. No faculty is untouched or untainted by sin's influence. We lost that original righteousness, that original justice.
So our will is affected too. We're not really free anymore.
In a crucial sense, no. The will, which was created with the ability to choose God and righteousness, is now fundamentally bent towards sin. It's, as the sources say, miserably enslaved to our sinful nature. We are morally helpless on our own. We can't not sin, ultimately, without God's intervention.
Okay, so we're internally enslaved to sin. Is that the whole picture of bondage?
No, it's bigger than that. Remember the kingly failure. It didn't just affect humanity, it had cosmic consequences. God's judgment included cursing the ground itself.
Right, thorns and thistles.
Exactly. Paul picks up on this in Romans 8, saying the entire creation was subjected to futility and is in bondage to decay because of human sin. The whole created order is disordered, groaning under this curse.
Wow. So our failure as kings messed up the whole kingdom, the whole environment.
It did. So we're in bondage internally to our own corrupted nature, and we're subject to external forces, spiritual enemies like Satan, who Paul calls the god of this age, and ultimately the power of death itself.
That's comprehensive bondage. Internal and external, moral and cosmic.
It is. And this kind of total enslavement, this deep disorder, it can't just be fixed with teaching or even forgiveness alone. It requires power. It requires liberation, conquest even.
So what does that demand?
It demands a divine king, a sovereign ruler with the power to break the chains of sin, defeat the spiritual enemies, conquer death, and ultimately restore not just human hearts, but the entire cosmic order back to righteous rule.
Okay, I see the symmetry now. Ignorance needs a prophet. Guilt needs a priest. Bondage needs a king. The ruin is specific, and the needed remedy seems equally specific.
Exactly. The structure of the problem dictates the necessary structure of the solution.
So the argument isn't just that Christ happened to fulfill these roles, but that these roles were necessary because of the specific damage.
Precisely. And the sources argue you can see this necessity playing out even in the Old Testament. God didn't just leave humanity in that threefold misery until Jesus showed up. He instituted temporary foreshadowing roles within Israel itself.
You mean the actual roles of prophet, priest, and king in the Old Testament?
Yeah. Those weren't random jobs. They were divinely appointed mediatorial offices, each designed to specifically counteract one dimension of the fall's effects, while pointing towards the ultimate mediator to come.
Okay, let's look at them one by one. The prophetic office in the Old Testament. How did that address the misery of ignorance?
Well, remember, the fallen mind is darkened, hostile to truth. Humanity, left alone, wouldn't seek God or true knowledge. So God had to initiate. He had to speak.
The prophets were his mouthpiece.
Exactly. People like Moses, Samuel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, they received God's word and declared it to the people. They brought light into the darkness, revealed God's will, exposed sin, proclaimed judgment, and offered promises of hope.
So they were actively pushing back against that natural human tendency to suppress the truth.
Constantly. They were calling people back to reality, back to God's covenant, guiding them when they were spiritually lost. Their entire function was necessary because of humanity's inherent ignorance and rebellion against divine truth.
And they weren't the final answer, right? They pointed forward.
Absolutely. They knew they were temporary. Moses himself predicted a future prophet, like him, but greater, who God would raise up. That's Deuteronomy 18. They were all signposts, pointing towards the ultimate prophet who would bring God's final and full revelation.
Okay, prophets tackle ignorance. What about the priests and the problem of guilt? How did the Old Testament priesthood address that?
So the priest's role was the opposite of the prophet's, in a way. The prophet represented God to the people. The priest represented the people to God.
Making intercession, offering sacrifices.
Exactly. Their whole job revolved around dealing with the guilt problem. Since humanity stood legally condemned and alienated from God, there needed to be a way to approach him, a way to deal with the sin that caused the separation.
And that was the sacrificial system.
Right. The tabernacle, later the temple, the Levitical priesthood, all the incredibly detailed laws about sacrifices. It was this elaborate system God ordained to manage the problem of guilt.
But it didn't actually fix the problem permanently, did it? Hebrews talks about that.
No, it couldn't. The blood of animals couldn't truly take away sin or satisfy divine justice fully. But the system served crucial purposes. It constantly reminded people of the seriousness of sin, the holiness of God, and the absolute necessity of atonement of shed blood for forgiveness.
It maintained the principle. Guilt requires a payment.
Yes. And it provided a temporary symbolic way to maintain covenant relationship, albeit imperfectly. It functioned as a placeholder, constantly pointing towards the need for a future perfect high priest and a single sufficient sacrifice that could permanently deal with guilt.
Right. Prophet for ignorance, priest for guilt. That leaves king for bondage. How did Old Testament kings fit into this picture?
The king's job was about righteous rule and power, executing justice, defending the nation from enemies, maintaining order according to God's law.
So directly combating the chaos and oppression that resulted from the fall.
Exactly. Remember, humanity was in bondage internally to sin, externally to enemies, decay, and death. You can't just talk someone out of that or even just forgive them. You need power to liberate them. You need a ruler to fight for them.
So the kings were supposed to be God's agents of liberation and order.
That was the ideal. They're meant to embody God's righteous reign, push back the consequences of the curse, defeat enemies, establish justice. Think of David, the warrior king who established Jerusalem.
But they often failed pretty spectacularly at that, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Most of them fell far short. But the office itself, and especially the promises God made to David about an everlasting kingdom through his line that pointed forward
To the ultimate king.
to the true Messiah. A king who wouldn't just rule Israel, but would have the power to definitively conquer sin in the human heart, defeat Satan and the powers of darkness, overcome death itself, and restore not just a nation, but the entire cosmos to God's perfect rule. The temporary kings were just faint shadows of the real king needed to reverse the bondage of the fall.
So these three OT offices were like placeholders, necessary stopgaps, each addressing one part of the problem, all setting the stage for the one person who could do all three perfectly.
That's a great way to summarize it. They demonstrated the need for mediation in these three specific areas, and they built the expectation for the one who would fulfill them all.
Okay, this is where it all comes together. The Old Testament set up the need, the structure. Now, the claim is that Jesus Christ is that perfect fulfillment. He embodies all three offices.
Yes, perfectly and eternally united in his one person. This is the heart of the triple cure. The very title Christ, or Messiah, means anointed one, and in the Old Testament, who got anointed?
Prophets, priests, and kings.
Exactly. So in calling Jesus the Christ, the New Testament is already signaling that he holds these consecrated offices. But he doesn't just hold them. He fulfills them in a way that's infinitely superior to anyone before him.
Okay, let's take them one by one again, but now focused on Christ. Christ the prophet. How is he superior? How does he cure ignorance?
Well, think about the difference. Old Testament prophets spoke for God. They delivered messages they received. Moses was great, but he was still a messenger.
Okay, and Jesus?
Jesus speaks as God. He is God the Son, the eternal Word, the Logos who became flesh. John 1 is all about this. Hebrews 1 says, God spoke through the prophets partially, but now he has spoken finally and fully in his Son.
So he doesn't just bring revelation, he is the revelation.
Precisely. His teaching isn't just relaying information. It's the direct unveiling of God's character, God's will, God's plan of salvation. That's why people were amazed. He taught with inherent authority, unlike the scribes who just cited traditions.
Matthew 7, yeah, with authority.
His words, his life, his very being cut through the darkness of human ignorance caused by the fall. He exposes the serpent's original lie and definitively reveals the truth about reality. When he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
He's making the ultimate prophetic claim.
He is. He is the truth that cures our fundamental ignorance and enmity towards God. He brings the light that overcomes the darkened house.
Okay, so he's the ultimate prophet revealing truth. But truth alone might just condemn us, given our guilt. So he must also be the perfect priest. How does his priesthood fix the guilt problem?
The book of Hebrews really unpacks this. It argues his priesthood is vastly superior to the old Levitical system. First, it's eternal.
Not temporary like the old priests who died and needed successors.
Right. Hebrews says he's a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, this mysterious ancient figure who represents an unending priesthood. And unlike the old priests, Jesus was sinless. He didn't need to offer sacrifices for himself first.
But the core of the priestly work is the sacrifice, right? Dealing with the guilt.
Absolutely. And here's the radical difference. The old priests offered endless sacrifices of animals, which could never truly take away sin. What did Christ offer?
Himself, his own life.
Exactly. He entered the true sanctuary, heaven itself, not an earthly copy. And he offered his own perfect, sinless blood as the sacrifice. Hebrews 9 says he did this once for all to put away sin.
Once for all, not repeated like the old system.
Never needs repeating. That one sacrifice, because it was him, God the Son, in human flesh, was infinitely valuable. It fully satisfied the justice of God, paid the entire debt for our treason, and achieved a complete, permanent atonement. The legal problem of guilt. Solved. Done.
That's staggering.
Oh.
But is his priestly work finished then?
The sacrificial part is. It is finished, he said on the cross. But his priestly work continues in another way. Hebrews also emphasizes his ongoing intercession.
What does that mean?
Having ascended to heaven, he sits at God's right hand, and Hebrews 7 says he always lives to make intercession for us. He's continually applying the benefits of his sacrifice, representing us before the Father, advocating for us.
So he doesn't just get us back into God's presence once, he keeps us there, guaranteeing access.
That's the idea. He bridges the gap permanently and ensures our relationship with God is secure because he's constantly mediating for us based on his finished sacrifice. He's the perfect ongoing cure for our guilt and alienation.
Prophet cures ignorance, priest cures guilt. That leaves the king to cure bondage. How does Christ function as the king who liberates us?
Well, first, he is the promised king, the Messiah from David's line. His arrival inaugurated the kingdom of God, maybe not fully visibly yet, but its power arrived with him.
And his kingship is about power, about defeating the things that enslave us.
Exactly. Remember the bondage. internal slavery to sin, external oppression by Satan, death, and the cosmic curse. The king's job is conquest and restoration.
How did he conquer? His death looked like defeat.
That's the paradox. His entire life of perfect obedience, culminating in his death and, crucially, his triumphant resurrection that was the decisive battle. Colossians 2 says on the cross, he disarmed the powers and authorities and triumphed over them.
So his death and resurrection broke the power of sin, death, and Satan.
It was the decisive blow. He defeated the slave masters. But his kingship has two faces, you could say. There's his present rule.
What does that look like?
Right now, he rules spiritually. He liberates human hearts from sin's dominion through his word and spirit. He gathers citizens into his kingdom, the church, empowers them to live righteously, and defends them against spiritual enemies. He's actively reversing the internal bondage.
Okay, reigning in hearts. But what about the external bondage, the curse on creation, death itself?
That's the future aspect of his kingship, the consummation. His reign is moving towards his second coming. And then he will exercise his authority fully and visibly. He'll judge the world, finally destroy death, 1 Corinthians 15 calls it the last enemy, and completely restore the entire created order. He will undo the cosmic curse, liberate creation from its bondage to decay, and establish the new heavens and new earth where righteousness dwells. His kingly work won't be finished until all the effects of the fall are reversed.
Wow, so it's a present reality and a future hope, complete victory over all forms of bondage.
And the crucial thing, again, is that these aren't three separate jobs done by three different people or even sequentially by Christ. They have to be unified in him.
Why? Why couldn't you just have a great prophet, a perfect priest, and a mighty king working together?
Think about it. A prophet reveals God's perfect standard and our failure. But without a priest, that truth only condemns us, right? It highlights our guilt with no solution.
Okay, so the prophet needs the priest.
Right. But what good is a priest who secures forgiveness if we're still totally enslaved to sin, unable to actually live in that forgiveness, if we just keep falling back into the same bondage?
Who would need the king to liberate you, to change your heart, to give you the power to live differently?
Exactly. The priest's work needs the king's power to be effective in our lives, and the king's rule needs the prophet's truth to guide it and the priest's reconciliation to establish its foundation. They are interdependent.
So Christ had to be all three simultaneously.
Yes. And look at the cross. It's the perfect example. His death is the ultimate priestly sacrifice. At the same time, it's the supreme kingly triumph over the powers of darkness, achieved through weakness. And it's the most profound prophetic declaration possible about God's justice and his love, spoken not just in words, but in action.
One act, three dimensions.
One unified mediator, performing one unified work of salvation that addresses every facet of our ruin. That's the beauty and necessity of the threefold office.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. We've journeyed from Adam's original job through the specific ways the fall broke everything to how Christ's threefold office provides the exact cure.
Yeah, the symmetry is really striking when you lay it out. The divine solution fits the human problem like a key in a lock.
So let's recap that triple cure one last time for the listener trying to hold it all together. The misery of ignorance.
The darkened, hostile mind is healed by Christ the prophet, who is the truth and brings God's definitive revelation.
The misery of guilt.
Our legal condemnation and alienation from God is healed by Christ the priest through his perfect once-for-all sacrifice and ongoing intercession.
And the misery of bondage.
Our internal slavery to sin and the external cosmic disorder is healed by Christ the King, who conquers our enemies, liberates our hearts, and will ultimately restore all creation.
Prophet, priest, king, addressing ignorance, guilt, bondage. It's incredibly comprehensive.
It has to be, because the ruin was total. You quoted the theologian Turton earlier, summarizing it perfectly. Ignorance is healed by the prophetic, guilt by the priestly, the tyranny and corruption of sin by the kingly office. It shows God's plan wasn't a patch job. It was a precise, sufficient, divinely engineered solution for the whole problem.
A structure that really does support the whole weight of salvation. It makes sense of why Christ had to be who he was and do what he did.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to chew on, building especially on that kingly office.
Go for it.
We talked about the fall, cursing the very ground, subjecting creation itself to futility and decay. If that's true, think about the staggering scope of Christ's kingly restoration work that's still coming. It's not just about saving human souls, it's about him making all things new. What does it really mean for the king to reverse the curse, not just in us, but in the atoms, the ecosystem, systems, the galaxies. What does a cosmos fully liberated from decay and death by its rightful king actually look like?
A truly cosmic restoration, that's definitely something to ponder. Thank you for walking us through that. It's been a real deep dive.
My pleasure. It's a profound topic.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this exploration has helped you see the incredible coherence and sufficiency of God's plan in Christ. We'll see you next time.